Hi, everybody. My name is Judith Mirkinson, and I'm here with Miho Kim, and we're from the Comfort Women Justice Coalition. And we're inviting you to watch the following, which is going to be the first in a series of Voices of Our Allies about the Comfort Women Justice Movement internationally. We're here today to celebrate, or actually to observe, the International Day and Memorial to Comfort Women, the hundreds of thousands of women and girls who were sexually enslaved by the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II. And we celebrate, or we observe today, August 14th, because 31 years ago, the courageous Haksun Kim was the first survivor to actually tell about her experiences in Korea. And she was followed actually by hundreds of other women who had been sexually enslaved from all over Asia, all over the many, many countries that Japan invaded and occupied. And this is going to be, there's been a concerted effort. On the one hand, we, as the Comfort Women Justice Coalition, are part of an international movement to bring justice to those survivors, demanding an official apology from Japan. And we're also part of a movement that demands an end to gender violence and an end to sexual violence everywhere in the world. And so this is going to be the first of a discussion from our allies about this topic and about Japan's refusal to actually admit their culpability.
So this particular episode is an interview featuring Ms. Mitsuko Hirai. Hirai sensei, she's a junior high school history teacher, as we fondly call her, is based in Osaka. She actually visited us here in the San Francisco Bay Area for the second anniversary of the Comfort Women Memorial here in San Francisco with her colleagues to gather more information about the struggle, to spread awareness and to educate the public and to partner across sectors and geographies and issues to grow the movement demanding justice from the Japanese government. And upon her return, she wrote a book titled The Memorial for Comfort Women in San Francisco. And since then, she and we have been very closely in touch. And she also has been in the forefront of continuing the education of this controversial historical truth, which in public schools in Japan is increasingly a taboo subject that puts teachers right in the crosshairs of really violent neo-nationalist growing, right-wing forces that claim that people like her are cultivating the next generation of anti-Japanese, which, I think through her own story about her own experiences, I hope you can judge for yourself. Before we move forward, just to let you know, also we have a short message Korean survivors. Grandma, one of the critical advocates in the course of building our memorial here in San Francisco. And is there anything else we need to mention before we go into the video?
No, there will be some things that you might not understand, and we will explain them at the end. And basically, this video series is going to be under the title Truth Under Threat. And it's part of a campaign, our campaign around historical denialism, which is being raised everywhere in the world as we see right-wing governments actually gaining ascendancy. So whether it's in Japan, in the United States, in Europe, that is what we have to fight against. So this is about listening to these women and listening to their voices and actually giving truth.
Yeah, so I hope that one of the things you kind of have a more nuanced, perspective on is just in the course of demanding justice, how preserving the truth of what happened itself is a struggle in itself, and speaking that truth and preserving it and continue to educate our next generation about it so that it never dies in itself is a critical component of our ability as a movement to continue to focus on the prize, so to speak, right? Ultimately winning justice. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to share the screen here. I hope you enjoy it. It's about 18 minutes and then we'll be back.
近現代史のことっていうのは大きくこう変わってきてるような気がしますよね。で、やっぱりきっかけはキム・ハクスンさんの1991年のカミングアウトで、このカミングアウトを彼女がした時の日本社会の様子は非常に好意的だったんですよね。キム・ハクスンさんよくぞ言ってくれた、本当にひどい状況にさらされて辛い人生を送ってきたんだなっていう形で、日本社会全体がキム・ハクスンさんのような慰安婦の方々に対して反感じゃなくって本当に辛い目に遭われた方々なんだという受け止め方を1991年したわけですよ。でにもかかわらず結局そこから、政府が調査をして1993年に河野談話を出した。でこの辺りから、河野談話を出すにあたってのこう批判とかないしはその慰安婦問題を取り上げることに対する批判が少しずつ出てくる中で1997年に全ての中学校の教科書に慰安婦が載ったと。でこれを見た安倍さんね、安倍さんは当時まだ衆議院議員なりたてのほやほやだけれども、若手議員たち、もちろん若手議員のバックにはもっといろんなオールドの議員がいるけども、そういう人々がなぜこんな日本の恥になるようなことを持てるということで攻撃をし始めた。でその攻撃に対してやっぱりとてもその攻撃を煽るような人々、産経新聞のような右派のメディアとかもあったし、その後日本会議という組織ができてきたりっていう形で、何しろ新聞やメディアを通じて、そういうことを教えるなとか、ないしはそういう女性たちは売春婦だったんだとかね、歴史を歪曲するようなことをどんどん流し始めて、でそのあたりから教科書会社がひるむようになったんですよね。
でその時光子先生は中学の歴史を教えてらっしゃったんですか？
そう、もうだから1997年に、教科書に載った時は、子どもたち曰く平井先生は危機として教えてたと、ようやく教科書に載ったって、その教科書を教室に持って行って、でみんなが使ってる今の教科書には載ってないけど、これからこの教科書が使われるって言って新しい教科書を紹介しながら慰安婦の授業をしたんですよね。でやっと子どもたちに慰安婦のことを教えられるって言って、私だけじゃなくって私の仲間たちの教師もどんなふうに授業を作ろうって言って、すごくこの慰安婦の授業をみんなで作り上げていったのが1997年。
で生徒たちの反応とかはどうだったんですか、その頃とか？
驚きですよね。戦争って当時は日本で教えられる戦争っていうのはせいぜい小学校だったら学童疎開とかそれから原爆とか。
原爆ね、私もなんか
自分たちは被害を受けたっていうね、被害者だったっていう、そういうふうなイメージが強いんですよね、日本の歴史教科書の書き方が。ところがそうじゃないよって、日本がまず侵略したんだよって。で侵略をして、その中でもちろん日本は まあ、被害受けてるけれども、それ以上の加害を中国とか朝鮮半島とか東南アジアとかに与えている、まあ、それをようやくこう学ぶのが中学校なんですけども、それでも女性たちの被害っていうのは出てこなかったんですよね。ここでこう女性たちがそういう目に遭ってたっていうのは、子どもたちにとってみればすごく衝撃で、やっぱり中学生15歳ぐらいの子供にしたら、戦場にそういうこう性をこう蹂躙されるような女性がどうして必要なんだろうっていう素朴な疑問がありました。
やっぱこう愛国心っていう
まあやってることじゃないので、結構客観的に、あ、そんなことを過去にやったんだっていう、子どもたちの方がそういう意味では賢いですね。客観的に捉えて、じゃあ先生それ解決してるのって言って聞いてきたんです。
ああ、なるほどね。正しい質問よね。それでなんか日本の嫌がら、日本の悪口をなんていうの、日本人のこと嫌いだから日本の悪口言ってるんだみたいな、今ねよく聞きますけどね、政治家とか
そういうのが二言目には、日本から出ていけって言われますよ。
あ、ミスコ先生も言われるんですか？
そんなに日本が嫌なら日本から出ていけって。いや
もう本当朝鮮人、いやもう朝鮮人民族にもウェルカム。
なんかね、その短絡思考というか、なんか嫌なら出ていけって、じゃあ誰も日本からいなくなるよって。
そういうことですよね。じゃあそういう、でもその反応からしてもやっぱり歴史がどう捉えられてるかっていうのが変わってきてるっていうのが分かりますね。
だから慰安婦っていう存在に関しては2012年で教科書から一旦消えるんですよ。全ての教科書から。で、それは消せってこう政府が言ったんじゃなくって、もう言ってみれば忖度ですよね。載せてたら攻撃される、自分の教科書会社が攻撃される。
守らなきゃいけない。
そういうので、2012年に一旦全ての教科書から消えてしまって、まあ、私にとってみれば、あってもなくっても教え続けてはいるんですけど、でも消えるとやっぱり、教科書にないから教えないっていう表紙はもちろん増えていきましたね。
それとやっぱり攻撃されるとかそういうやっぱり恐怖とかもあったんですかね。当たりが強くなるっていう懸念は教師の間であったん
でしょうね。自民党のその地方議員とかに対して、自民党からその自分たちの地域でそういう変更的な、向こうが言う変更ね、偏ってる授業をやってるような教員をあぶり出せみたいな、そういうふうなこう動きがあったから、そういう意味ではその議会なんかでやり玉に上がったらっていうような、そういう心配も、先生たちの中には出てきたのかなっていうのは思いますよね。
でも光子先生ご自身もなんかいろんな攻撃を受けましたもんね。多角的にというか、権力の。
十数年にわたって攻撃されてますよね。でも、
どんな形でそれはやっぱ現れたんですか？
私たち学校で私が例えば作ってるプリントとかは公文書という扱いになるので、開示請求というのが出されたら、公開しなければならないっていう文書になるそうなんですよね。で、私はそれとってもおかしいと思ってるんだけども、でもその議員たちの中には平井の授業プリントを開示せよとか、ないしは教育委員会に圧力をかけて、各学校で特に歴史のこの近現代あたりの授業プリントを集めて出せとかいうような、そういうふうな動きとかがあって、その中で例えばなんで教科書に載ってないのに慰安婦を教えているとかね、関東大震災のその朝鮮人虐殺とか、そういうのを詳しく教えてるとか、なんでこの平井っていう教師は加害の歴史ばっかり教えるんだみたいな形でばっかりじゃないんだけども 議会で取り上げられる。
処分かなんかはお受けになったんですか、結局。
教育委員会、授業自体が問題があるっていうことはならなかったです。例えば平井先生がこれまで慰安婦の授業をずっとやってきた、そのことが問題かって言ったら、それは問題にされたけれども、最終的にそのことで処分を受けるってことはなかったですね。ただ、無断で、実は学校でメディアの取材を受けた。学校の、監督権は校長にあるので、校長に言わずに、その外部取材を受けたっていう件では、一番軽い処分は受けましたね。
なるほどね。で、やっぱそういった、でもやっぱりこう表沙汰になるわけですから、光子先生を遠ざけようとしたりとか、あるいは逆に支援しようとしたりとか、周囲にいろんな動きがあったと思うんですけど、それはどういう感じでした？
とっても私の研究とか活動の仲間は実はこれで広がったんです。っていうのが、この慰安婦を教えて処分をしようなんていう動きに対して、絶対それを許してはならないというその人たちが、その思想信条を超えてつながり合って、何度も教育委員会に交渉に行ってくれたりということをすごく熱心に繰り返してくれたんですよね。で、その中に、だからそういう意味ですごくこの、慰安婦問題とかそういう加害のことに取り組んできて、で、もしも逆に言うと何にも問題にならずに来たら、それほど私自身の研究や活動は広がらなかったかもしれないけど、逆に問題になったことによって多くの人たちが慰安婦の授業を教えて、その問題になるなんておかしいとか、慰安婦の授業をもっともっとすべきなのにしている平井さんがどうしてそういうターゲットになるのかっていうことで、すごくいろんな人たちがつながった。
非国民扱いするのはじゃあどういった人たちだったんですか？
やっぱり加害の事実を教えさせたくないっていう、日本で言えばヘイトスピーチを繰り広げている在徳会っていう組織が、ありましたけども、そういう組織とか、あとやはり右派の政治家ですよね。日本で言えば、自民党、それから日本維新の会、サンフランシスコの
強いもんね。
時にそれこそそれを立てたらサンフランシスコ市と、姉妹都市関係を切るといった吉村知事なんかがすごく煽ったんです、ツイッターで。吉村知事のツイッターのフォロワーっていうのはすごい数がいるので、吉村さんが煽った途端にダーッと広がりましたよね。
なるほど。
私への批判が。
でも今維新もめちゃくちゃ固く土台築いてるじゃないですか、大阪あたりとか。ってことはこの先の展望どうなんでしょうね。やっぱ日本の加害の歴史を教えるっていうその教育、教科書から歴史どんどん消えていってるっていうのはまだ続いてるわけだし。
そうですね。維新と自民党がタッグを組んで歴史教科書から自分たちが教えさせたくないものを消そうっていう動きが本当に強まってますね。だからそういう意味では日本だけじゃなくって中国や韓国とかそういった近隣の国々との人たち、研究者や市民たちとタッグを組んでそこを阻止するような動きをしていく必要があるなと。で、実際日本の教科書には近隣諸国条項って言って日本のだから東南アジアとかそれから東アジアとか日本が戦争で加害した国の状況に関してその記述に関しては配慮することっていう条項は生きてるんですよね。だからそれをしっかり守れっていうことをやっぱり言っていく必要があるなっていうのを思いますよね。
で、教師たちの例えば組合だとかそういったオルグされた声っていうのはそれに関してはだんだんまとまっ ってきているとか、そういった動きがあるんですかね。
日本の教職員組合自体がとっても弱体化してる。今アメリカなんかではすごくシカゴとかでも教職員組合頑張ってるじゃないですか。で、日本ではもちろん頑張ってはいるんだけども、今どちらかというとその授業内容よりも教師の働き方の過酷な本当に労働条件に対する戦いがメインになってて、なかなかその、教育の本道である教科書とか、そういったものに対してこう教員の、目がこう向いてないのが現状ですね。でも教科書問題に取り組む組織とかは日本にずっとあるので、そこが中心になって引っ張ってってるっていう感じかな。
でそんな中でやっぱりジェンダーのことを、さっき慰安婦に関する記述が、ジェンダーにこうなんていうんですか、を照らし上げる、稀なトピックだったっておっしゃったと思うんですけど、やっぱその重要性っていうのも日本社会がこうやって受けがどんどんしてってすごくやっぱり重要だと思うんですけど、そこら辺はどう思われますか？
そうですよね。やっぱり
としてもね、
アメリカから始まった MeToo 運動、これが広がっていってて、日本でもだから女性の性暴力であるとか、そういったものに対して声を上げる人たちが増えている。実際に伊藤詩織さんなんかの件もあったけれども、慰安婦の問題を最近の見方としては単なる歴史的な事実であるっていうだけじゃなくって、やはり女性が性暴力を受けてきた現代の人権問題として捉える、そういう捉え方っていうのはかなりこう広がりつつあるんですよね。だから教師の世界だけでっていうよりも、そういったこうジェンダーの問題として広くこの問題をこう訴えていく状況は生まれてるなって、そういう面ではねいい方向にも行ってる部分はあるんですよね。
新しい機会がこう生まれつつある感じですね。運動の空間でも。
それと若者たち、大学生たちがこう自分たちでこの問題に向き合ってとてもいい本をこの前出したんですよ。一橋大学っていう大学の大学生たちなんですけどね。で私たちこの慰安婦の本とかをたくさん出してるけれども、なかなかこう売れない、はっきり言って。ところがね、そういう慰安婦のこととか日韓関係のことを真正面から取り上げた大学生たちが作った本は、そういう本にしたら驚くぐらい売れたんです。1万部超えたんです。日本のそういう本で1万部超えるっていうのはもう本当に奇跡のような形なんですけど、だから若者たちの中にも関心が広がっているっていう気はしますね。
Okay, we're back. So what do you think, Mark?
I thought it was really interesting, and one thing that there are many things that strike me around this interview, but one of the first things that struck me was when she said the fact that I was attacked meant that I got more support. And actually that has been our experience in San Francisco. The more the Japanese consulate, the voice of the Japanese government, attacked the building of our statue, the more support
That is true.
We got.
And they gave us free press.
Yeah. And people would say all this over a statue, and we'd go, this is because the statues are a focal point of the demand for justice. And that's why the Japanese government, hates them so much and is trying to get them down all over the world. I mean, the other thing that really struck me is how universal this whole historical denialism is, whether it's in Japan denying the comfort women, or it's Holocaust denial, or in the United States, it's the push to not talk about the enslavement of millions of Africans, or saying, there was a thing in Texas saying, oh no, they weren't enslaved, they were just immigrant workers. It's the way that they talk about, no, they're not sex slaves. They were
Right.
just prostitutes. And
Though they were underage,
yeah, and
but it was
you know,
based on consent.
a prostitute does not volunteer to be raped 50
Right.
times a day. So that even that argument
Yeah,
is
like
totally
what does it matter?
ridiculous, And so I just think that, or the push in the United States, whether it's the making the federal right to abortion illegal, or the refusal to talk about any kind of queer gender issues or trans issues, or the infuriating stuff about censorship in the textbooks, that all is really universal. And a lot of it is because of gender, and it's for oppressed people rising up. And a really good example of that is the latest Korean election, which President Yoon
Mhm.
Was elected a lot because he was an anti-feminist, and because young men said women have gone too far.
Mhm.
And it's just, that's true all over the place, in Orban in Hungary, same.
Yeah. When you mentioned about like people's reactions, in where we live, at least, I also personally got reactions by my friends like, well, it's just a statue. Like, why is Japanese government so up in arms about, protesting it? But what comes to mind is also like throughout the South, there are this huge
Mhm.
movement to bring down statues and memorials, especially in public places of Confederate,
Mhm.
faces of, Confederate leadership. And also back in the UK, the Rose Must Fall, campaign, statue of Cecil Rhodes. Um, and that movement is still going strong, and I think memorialization is something that really symbolizes what the public as a society as a whole acknowledges
Mhm.
as truth that is important enough to be preserved into in perpetuity,
Mhm.
right? Because it doesn't just pop up and fall the
Right.
next week.
Right.
And so I can understand the significance and weight of it. And one thing that I think for especially the Western audience, that might be a disconnect to some extent is, I think when people hear about World War II, we immediately in the West think of the European theater.
Mhm.
Is that true?
That's right. Yes.
So Asia's kind of, out there yonder, and also Japan was not quite the group of the European,
Mhm.
colonizing forces, although Japan modernized specifically to copycat, so to speak, right, the European colonial strategies, and expanded the nation building efforts beyond its own borders throughout Asia Pacific, and that's what we saw in World War II, right, culminate. So I think I really appreciate the parallel that you draw, between the efforts to fight, for truth here, in many ways, with this particular comfort woman issue. What did you think about her connecting like the whole challenge of like educating, as a teacher, like all the direct kind of assault and harassment really, and
Well,
also power harassment by school authorities.
yeah, I mean, I think that's happening here too. A really good example is for teachers who teach about Palestine
Mm-hmm,
and are anti-Zionist, they are being censored.
mm-hmm,
And the censorship, as I mentioned before, for instance, in Florida, where they're refusing to discuss really the issue of gender, the issue of, what we now call the non-binary. And I think they're going to also send, and the whole fight around so-called critical race theory,
mm-hmm.
which is code
Right.
really for teaching about racism and the history of enslavement and the history of genocide towards indigenous people here in the Americas. So I think it really is, it's a very, very dangerous moment in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the refusal of Japan to acknowledge what they did to these hundreds of thousands of women is particularly sort of instrumental or telling about the connections between gender violence and the oppression of other peoples. And I think that we really have to take that seriously. I think also, I mean, I really liked it when she said, teaching is about content, you know, because that's true. And what we teach our children is, we know from our own experiences, is going to influence them, you know, for the rest of their lives. So this is really, we can go one way or the other. And that's the period that we find ourselves in, these two contending forces. And so I thought that was really important.
Yeah. So this interview was conducted in late July of 2022. And I just want to connect sort of this issue and her experiences with the government forces in Japan, and the fact that the ruling party, Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP, whose most recognizable faces is Shinzo Abe, who was killed just last month. But you know, because of his murder too, like there's been a lot of things about him in the news, and there's a lot of positive legacies, you know, of his leadership while he was prime minister in Japan, being touted around the world through eulogies that are, you know, expressed. But, you know, in reality, Abe was one of the instigators of this whole denialist movement that has become more and more mainstream in Japan ever since he stepped into politics. Although he was kind of born into a political family, a lot of you may already know that his grandfather Kishi was a prime minister of Japan post-war.
And a war criminal.
And the U.S., you know, brought him out of Sugamo prison as a prisoner of war, and worked with him and placed him. Well, I don't want to say placed him, but basically, it would, you know, Kishi would not have become prime minister without the U.S.
Selected, not elected.
We don't know that term here in the States. But anyway, so, and Abe, one of the things that he's also actually, I think, should be remembered for is his attack on gender equality and women's rights. And Mitsuko-san, she mentioned a woman's name, Shiori Ito, and she, for many of you who might not be familiar, she's actually one of Time's 100 most influential people of 2020. And the face of the Japan's Me Too movement is kind of the summed up version. But she really bravely spoke up about the rape she experienced by a very prominent, powerful Japanese journalist. Turns out Abe was very close with him and helped to absolve him, okay, when Shiori alleged this rape publicly. She ultimately did win the civil suit, but we should remember that this very brave young woman, you know, and her speaking up for justice was never, you know, never reached fruition, in large part due to Abe stepping in with his political influence to protect his friend and squash justice for her, right? So that's one of the key connections. And also the political party Restoration Party, whose member is includes Yoshimura, that Mitsuko-san mentioned, is, you know, working very closely with LDP to make sure that history of aggression or history of any racialized violence committed by Japan as a country or the people are not taught anymore, at least in the public realm. And so that battle still continues, and the populist forces of this cause also is growing forces internationally. Zaitokukai is one of those groups that was started in Japan, but many of the people that helped found and lead Zaitokukai are now expanding their tentacles, if you will, into other countries, including the United States here. Because Yumiko Yamamoto, one of those leaderships, right? She actually co-founded a group called Nadeshiko Action, and it specifically targets Japanese-speaking new immigrants to the United States from Japan to spread the correct, quote unquote, history of wartime Japan, and to cultivate them as active agents to advocate in U.S. Government and schools and whatnot to revise what we teach in terms of comfort women in our schools and communities, right?
I think one of the other really important things that she talks about, and in the next video, tiny little video, we'll discuss this as well, is that the comfort women is not just, the issue of the comfort women can be just looked at as, oh, these terrible things happened to these women and it was in the past, but we should think about them and we should demand apology because they were so badly treated. And I think that's a very narrow way of looking at what this movement is about and what this struggle is about. Because the issue of the comfort women is really a human rights issue, and it's about the general issue of gender violence and femicide. And it was actually the comfort women, the people who spoke out, like Haksin Kim, like Kim Bung-duk, like the women from the Philippines, who went and talked not only in their own countries, but in the early 90s, in 1993, went to one of the first human rights conferences in Vienna. And as a result of that, along with women who had been raped in the former Yugoslavia, the human rights sort of community, the international community was put on notice. You have to talk about this. And eventually that meant that the issue of rape during war and gender violence became explicitly a war crime and a crime against humanity. And that's how we have to look at this issue. And people will say, well, we want to talk about this so that it won't happen again, but they sort of leave it there. And we have to insist that the issue of the comfort women and their courage, and they're linking it to what happened in Vietnam, or what happens in the Congo, or what's happening to the Rohingya, or who knows what's happening in Ukraine. Actually, that there's a continuum, and that we have to look at this as a human rights issue. And I think that's actually one of the lessons of these comfort women survivors, is that we have to expand it, because we know impunity just breeds repetition. That the one thing that stops people is holding them accountable and responsible, and an end to impunity.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yeah, I remember, Merck, you talk, about how violence against women in wartime being explicitly an international, crime against humanity and war crime, that now we can use that as a tool to prosecute those responsible.
Right.
And also what that does is like it moves the moral compass globally, like big time, right? To overturn what was completely a norm for as long as human beings have existed, right? Where, claiming the woman, of conquered areas or whatever was a triumphant, what is it, like a trophy, right? So all that being reversed, it's quite a paradigm shift and quite revolutionary, really. And these women have spoken up and really amplified their voices to move to make these things happen. And that's one thing I noticed in common between what Mitsuko-san was saying and a lot of harmonies talk about is, how there was a backup and a solid support of the whole movement around these brave souls. And I would imagine that it was similar with Shiori Ito-san, the young lady. And how to make it possible for the survivors' voices to claim the front and center of a movement demanding justice, how critical it is to have the support, right, and the validation and protection, right, and solidarity, right, all around. And that's what the feminist movement provided for the comfort women, and that's what the community around Mitsuko Sensei provided for Mitsuko Sensei. And to this day, she continues to teach in spite of ongoing harassment. It has not let down, and if anything, I think the Japan increasingly becoming emboldened, as a society, with its kind of historical racism and prejudices and things like this. It's not making it any safer for Mitsuko-san and her colleagues.
Yeah.
So all the more reason for us to forge international solidarity, to stay in touch, to listen to each other. And so we hope that you are moved to continue to stay not only posted on this issue, but reach out, right, and make connections. And if there's any way that we can help in that, great. Get in touch with us. Reach out to us on Facebook, Gmail. Also, there are many of our colleagues that are in the teaching profession, just like Mitsuko-san in the United States as well, where I belong as in Asian American Studies, but the Association for Asian American Studies, for example, has a caucus on comfort women issue specifically. And we, CWJC, worked to get the comfort women subject included in the history education throughout the state of California, working with the California Department of Education several years back. And there's K through 12 teachers, right, that we're also working with to develop curriculum and to educate other teachers and to incorporate, into issues of solidarity or world history or, gender studies. And so there are many angles that this subject can contribute to. Anything to add?
No, I think, I think the one thing that I would add, and goes to our next tiny little video, is that unfortunately, as we have seen throughout history, and certainly in the last period of time, women are often thrown under the bus, really, in the name of geopolitics. And that's really happening now. And in terms of Asia, where, the Obama, then Trump, then Biden administrations are building this trans-Pacific partnership and against China in specific. And really intrinsic to that is the alliance between Japan and Korea. And of course, the Philippines is in that, and Australia. Those are the four main countries along with the United States. And so as a result, actually, in 2015, there was something called the 2015 agreement between Korea and Japan, in which Japan said, okay, we're going to make an agreement that the comfort women issue is completely resolved. It's never to be talked ever again. It's done.
And not to ever be brought up in any international forum.
Right. And we're never going to talk about forced.
Right.
We're never going to use the term sex slaves. Those were two really important things. And we're going to pay millions of dollars, I think $1 million yen, to a private fund to give some money to those survivors that are left. But this is over. And so that was under the Park administration. Actually, it was people were so outraged by this idea. None of the survivors were consulted. Nobody was talked about. They only talked about people from Japan, from Korea, that this was between Japan and Korea, forgetting about everybody else.
Oh, you mean all the other comfort women from different countries?
Because it's now pretty much documented that actually there were maybe 500,000 women involved and hundreds of thousands from China, as well as Korea and Philippines and the other countries. And so there was complete outrage, and it helped to bring down the park administration in Korea. It wasn't the only issue, obviously.
Yeah, people were just extremely
And
outraged, including grandmas.
yeah, the grandmas, yeah. And so when President Moon came in, he actually said, you know, this was a really faulty agreement. It wasn't victim-centered, which is one of the cornerstones of international law when you do transformative justice, and when you actually, you know, there are certain remedies and they have to be victim-centered under international practices. And so it's sort of thrown out. Now, President Yoon has come in and said, we're going to go with this agreement.
Who won basically on an anti-women's rights platform.
Right. And so and this is absolutely outrageous once again. And basically they're saying, well, our partnership, which Yoon said, the Japanese-Korean partnership is intrinsic to world peace, is more important than what happens to justice for these women. And it's, you know, it's in the past, and, you know, who cares? So the next little clip that you're going to see is Yoon Sun Lee talking about this and saying, absolutely not. You know, you have to give us justice, and you have to go by the agreements under international law and international practices that are part of that, which is acknowledging officially, having reparations, teaching the subject in your schools, having museums, investigating. Those are all demands that are made by the international community.
Prosecuting the perpetrators.
Yeah, and this is also under a new practice under international law called the right to truth. So they're really culpable under many international agreements and under international law, but they're just, you know, it's Japan. And it's very important that we continue to fight about this, because the more that they get away with it, that allows other people to get away with it as well. And, you know, it would be really, to me, it's very ironic that they didn't just apologize 30 years ago, because then the whole thing would have sort of gone away. But they couldn't, because it's against their national honor and pride, and because really intrinsic to military life in Japan, as well as other places, is the idea that men need sex during war. I like the way that she talked about it, the provisioning of women during wartime, because that's what the comfort women were. They were just regarded as, you know,
military supplies.
Yes, toilet paper.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well said. Thank you. So should we play a 4-minute clip by a survivor grandma, our beloved Grandma Lee? And we will just, oh, did I share screen just now? Hold on. Give me 1 second. I am going to share the screen. Where's Grandma Lee? Yeah.
윤석열 대통령님, 안녕하십니까? 반갑습니다. 요즘 자꾸 2015년 합의를 공식화한다는 뉴스가 나와서 제가 잠을 못 자고 있습니다. 대통령님, 후보 시절에 약속하지 않았습니까? 대통령이 안 돼도 위안부 문제 꼭 해결하겠다고 하셨지요. 그 말씀 제가 무척 고맙게 생각하고 잘 하시겠지 기대하고 있습니다. 그런데 왜 이런 보도가 나오는 거입니까? 아니, 택도 없는 2015년 합의는 무효입니다. 이 합의를 전제로 한 어떤 조건도 받아들일 수 없습니다. 실효계획도 들어줘야 합니다. 왜냐고요? 유엔에서 제시하고 저희가 수십 년간 요구해온 7가지 해결의 원칙이 있습니다. 범죄 인정, 공식 사죄, 법적 배상, 책임자 처벌, 진상 규명, 지속적인 교육, 추모비와 역사관 건립입니다. 2015년 합의는 이 중 단 한 가지도 해결 못했습니다. 오히려 일본 정부는 미국으로 독일로 다니면서 2015년 합의를 위안부 문제 다 끝났다느니 엉터당탄습니다. 소녀상을 철거하라고 하고 방독을 하고 있지 않습니까? 이게 우리 역사를 씌우는데 악용을 하고 있는데요. 이게 무슨 해결입니까? 이렇게 기만적인 합의를 왜 우리에게 강요합니까? 위안부 문제는 전 세계적인 인권 문제입니다. 그러니 다른 문제와 결부시키지 말고 따로 분리해서 해결해야 합니다. 한일 간의 협상으로는 해결이 안 되니 중립적인 국제기구 유엔 국제사법재판소에 맡기면 됩니다. 일본의 범죄를 명확히 밝히고 우리들의 명예를 회복할 방법은 이것뿐입니다. 저는 분명히 말합니다. 유엔 국제사법재판소에서 판결이 나오면 저는 그 판결을 따르겠습니다. 대통령님, 약속을 지키세요. 제 말을 무겁게 들어주세요. 2015년 합의로는 절대 해결 못합니다. 저희를 2번 죽이지 마세요. 모든 피해자들을 대신해서 이 용수가 이렇게 부탁드립니다. 올해 8.15 되기 전에 위안부 문제의 올바른 해결에 대해 만나서 얘기합시다. 연락 주세요. 고맙습니다.
You know, instead of meeting with her, actually, last week when Nancy Pelosi, my representative, went to Asia in that really ill-advised visit to Taiwan. She also went to Korea, and Grandma Lee wanted to meet with her. And instead, what happened was she was completely manhandled and thrown out of her wheelchair.
She injured herself.
And injured.
She's 92.
Yeah. And so this is the way they treat these women now.
Yeah, that was infuriating.
It's totally outrageous. And so I think, you know, this is just another example of how historical denialism must be fought, and how, you know, listening to the voices of these women reveals the truth, the real truth. And we have to, as a movement, as a transnational movement, we really have to insist on honoring the demands that these women have put forward.
I just want to touch on a couple things. One is she mentioned official apology. And I hear, pretty often, well, didn't Japan already apologize? Right? So I just want to clarify. An official apology has to be either a cabinet or parliament or a parliamentary, meaning the government passed apology. So it cannot be simply an apology issued by one public official representing the Japanese government, such as, Prime Minister in the past has expressed deep remorse. Yes, that definitely constitutes as an apology. However, is it an official apology by the government of Japan? Because if it's a sincere apology, then you wouldn't turn around the next day and speak to your own domestic audience in Japan in a press conference. Oh no, Japan did not, is not responsible for any coercion that happened, right? You don't contradict yourself. You don't backtrack. So an official apology has to be an acknowledgement of the crime as, as it was
That's
a
right.
crime, and it cannot be revocable, and it has to be unequivocal. So that's the distinction we draw. And it's not just to, publicly shame, the country or the people of the country, which Abe, I think, really benefited by framing it that way. He actually spoke at the Congress here, many years ago. And in his speech to Congress, he said, I just don't want my future generations of young Japanese people growing up and then facing the world and continue to have to apologize, a countless number of times, just like the people of Japan are having to do right now. He kind of devolved the responsibility of having to apologize on behalf of the Japanese country, the nation state, to individual nationals of Japan. But that's not the individual's job to do, right? So the way to make it official is for the government to do it. Just like, it reminds me of what happened through the Civil Liberties Act, with regard to the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. And I remember a lot of the families of the survivors, saying to me, for our elders, it wasn't really about the money, but it was to restore our honor. And it was an acknowledgement, that we wanted, to be told by the United States, what we did to you was wrong, and it was a violation of your civil rights and civil liberties, and that, we have deep remorse. And, we recognize your human dignity was violated, and that we will do whatever it takes as a country to ensure that it's not repeated again, right? That your future, generations don't have to be afflicted, right? A similar injustice. But that is not necessarily the case in Japan. If anything, racism that historically existed to help the Japanese, sleep at night while they were conducting all these atrocities to, women and other people in colonized and occupied places, is actually facing a resurgence. So you see more hate crimes, more hate speech against the same racialized minorities that you saw during World War II in Japan today. So this is, also, I think, an issue of, denialism being a weapon to spread hate, right? Specifically, as it has been acknowledged with regard to historical denialism of the Holocaust in Europe, right? So I just want to mention, yeah, go ahead.
It doesn't mean that these, the fact that, for instance, things are acknowledged, it doesn't mean that it goes away. But it sets a different standard that one can call upon. The fact that slavery has been outlawed everywhere in the world doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in different places, but people know it's wrong. And to say that rape during war and that gender violence in general, rape in general is a war crime, is a crime against humanity, is really important. And actually it's so odd because clearly the Japanese government knows it's wrong, because otherwise they wouldn't make such a fuss about acknowledging that they did it. But on the other hand, the way they deal with it is they say, but it's the women's fault.
Or the local colluders.
Right.
And
yeah. or these were prostitutes, they volunteered. And so it's really important that these international standards are applied and created, and that there's something that you can use to prosecute, even if
Yeah.
it doesn't happen
Yeah.
right away.
Like embodied in all
Yeah.
aspects of,
Yeah,
the choices that our society makes on our behalf, right?
Right.
As a collective.
right.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Well, shall we move to closing?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have some exciting opportunities in case any of you are interested in either learning more about the issue or just supporting us or connecting. If you want to mention the upcoming event.
Yeah, well, first of all, Comfort Women Justice Coalition is www.remembercomfortwomen.org. And our email is comfortwomencoalition@gmail.com. And we really want to invite you on September 24th. We're actually having our 5th anniversary of the statue. So 5 years later, the statue is still there, and it's going to be there for generations to come. And we're really excited that we've made it to 5 years. And we're also really excited because we haven't been able, because of the pandemic, to gather at the statue, which is on St. Mary's Square in San Francisco. And it's September 24th from 1 to 3. And you can look at our Facebook, which is Comfort Women Justice Coalition, or go to our website to find out more. And we're really excited and hope you can come. And it is going to be live streamed. So we invite all of you, and we will be putting out all the information. It will be on Facebook live stream. And we hope that this is just the first in many little videos that we put out, and it's going to be on our YouTube channel.
Yeah. Well, actually, the next one, just to give a heads up about the next interview, is with Chonja Pang, and she is a veteran Comfort Women activist and co-representative of the Kansai Network to resolve the Comfort Women issue. And the Kansai region in Japan encompasses Osaka, I don't know, like Hyogo, Kyoto, and a couple other prefectures around the area, and is a really key player in the nationwide network of folks that are dedicated to supporting and advocating on behalf of Comfort Women. And also, as you know, many of the members are Japanese, pressing their own governments domestically to take up this issue and take responsibility. So that would be really interesting. Yeah, and then let me show you the poster for our event. Hold on 1 second.
Technical difficulties.
Share screen. Sorry, I don't know what's going on because I don't know how to share the screen, but we did have an event poster.
Say share screen down there.
Yeah. There you go. I'm sorry, it's a little small, but
As you see, September 24th from 1 to 3 at St. Mary's Square in San Francisco, which is between California and Pine, and between Kearney and Grant.
yep.
And we hope to see you there. And let's take August 14th to rededicate ourselves, to bring justice to the Comfort Women, and to really end this millennial-old campaign of gender violence.
Take care, and we'll see you at our next episode. Bye.